Your air conditioner is losing. You already know this. Every August, you watch it run for 8, 10, 12 hours straight. And by 9 at night, your upstairs bedrooms are still radiating heat, like the ceiling itself is sunburnt. You paid somewhere between $4,000 and $12,000 for that system. You were told it would handle the load. It cannot, and it was never going to, because the problem was never about cooling power. It was about what nobody told you is happening 6 inches above your head. 83% of summer heat gain in a typical home enters through the roof and ceiling, not the walls, not the windows you spent a fortune upgrading. The ceiling. Your roofing material absorbs solar radiation, conducts it into the structure, and by midday your attic air is sitting at 150 degrees. That heat radiates downward, passes through your insulation, and pours into your living space like an open oven door. And here is where everything you were taught falls apart. You were told the answer is more insulation, thicker batts, higher R value, blow more cellulose into the attic floor. So you did. You spent the money, and your house is still hot at 9 p.m. because fiberglass and cellulose do not stop radiant heat. They absorb it, they hold it, and once the sun drops, they release it back downward into your rooms like a slow drip furnace running on yesterday's sunshine. You have been paying to install a heat battery directly above your bed and calling it protection. This is not a new realization buried in some laboratory. In the 1950s, a man named Alexander Schwartz sold millions of square feet of a radiant barrier product directly to homeowners through newspaper ads. Women stapled it to their own walls with a staple gun. No contractor, no permit, no monthly bill that makes your stomach clench. NASA used the same principle to keep astronauts alive in temperature swings of 900 degrees. The Romans understood a version of it 2,000 years ago. Then the fiberglass industry noticed their sales were slipping. Lobbyists moved. A federal regulatory ruling landed. By 1965, Schwartz's product was pulled from the market entirely. The inventor died, and an entire generation of homeowners was handed Pink Panther commercials and told to keep stuffing more heat-absorbing material into their ceilings. 60 years of that lie is what your utility bill is built on right now. The physics never changed. The only thing that stops radiant heat is a surface that reflects it before it ever enters your living envelope. Here is the math they never wanted you to run. 97%. That is the measured reflectance of radiant energy off a thin aluminum surface separated by an air gap, documented by NASA engineer Clark Beck at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in the mid-1950s. Not a marketing claim. A laboratory figure produced under military-grade testing conditions. 97% of the heat trying to cook your ceiling bounced back before it ever touches your living space. Now hold that number in your head and compare it to what you actually bought. You bought fiberglass. You bought it because a single metric called R value told you it was the correct purchase. R value measures resistance to conductive heat transfer, heat moving through physical contact, molecule to molecule, but the dominant heat load entering your roof in summer is not conductive. It is radiant. It travels the way light travels, in electromagnetic waves, straight through air until it strikes a surface and gets absorbed. Fiberglass absorbs that wave. It does not reflect it. It soaks it in and holds it, then slowly releases it into your rooms at 10, 11 midnight, long after the sun has gone down. A reflective air gap reflects it. The distinction between those two outcomes is the difference between a house that cools down at sunset and when your air conditioner is still fighting at 1 in the morning. You paid for the wrong defense against the wrong type of heat, and you paid a billion-dollar industry to tell you it was the only option. By the early 1960s, millions of square feet of reflective foil insulation had already been installed in American homes. People were stapling it up themselves, no contractor, no permit, cutting their summer cooling costs with a material that cost a fraction of what fiberglass demanded. Alexander Schwartz's infra insulation company had been selling it directly to homeowners since the 1940s. Schmidt and Deckerhoff had commercialized the underlying concept in Germany back in 1925. This was not fringe science. This was 3 decades of proven, self-installed, exposed to the public technology, and then Owens Corning looked at the numbers. Not the physics numbers, the revenue numbers. Their entire business model depended on one assumption, that you need thicker, denser, more expensive material to control heat. A foil sheet with a staple gun destroyed that assumption. So the question was never whether reflective barriers work. The question was how you measure them. And the answer the industry settled on was simple. You do not measure them at all. You grade insulation by a standard that only captures conductive resistance, a standard that is structurally blind. Every year, $130 billion moves out of American households and into the heating and cooling industry. That is not a service economy. That is a harvest. You spend $2,000 annually fighting temperature inside walls you already owned, and nearly half of that goes to war against heat that should never have crossed your roof deck in the first place. 3 million HVAC systems get ripped out and replaced every single year, $5,000 to $12,000 per installation. Maintenance contracts siphon another $10 billion. Technicians bill you $150 an hour to service machines whose only job is to undo a problem that a passive surface could have prevented before it started. Now ask yourself, who holds the assets in this arrangement? You hold the mortgage, you hold the electric bill, you hold the maintenance contract, but you do not hold the mechanism that decides which solutions are allowed to compete for your attention. That mechanism has a name. The R-value rule, enforced by the Federal Trade Commission, became the only legal yardstick for insulation performance claims in the United States. It measures conductive resistance. Only conductive resistance. A radiant barrier does not slow conduction. It reflects energy before conduction begins. So the moment the R-value rule became the gatekeeper, every reflective product on the market was structurally disqualified from making a performance claim, not because it failed, but because the ruler was built to measure a different wall. The North American Insulation Manufacturers Association, the trade group for fiberglass and cellulose producers, lobbied for exactly this outcome. The FTC brought action against infra insulation. Schwartz died. The company shut down in 1965. No peer-reviewed study ever said the product did not work. No government agency published a retraction. What changed was who was allowed to talk about the physics in a sales context. That is not a failure of science. That is asset protection dressed in regulatory language. The entire downstream economy, your compressor, your ductwork, your August electric bill that makes your chest tighten, all of it depends on one condition remaining true. That radiant heat enters your structure unchallenged, and you pay someone else to remove it after the fact. You are not a homeowner in this equation. You are a recurring revenue line. The machine does not need you to be comfortable. It needs you to keep spending. And the single cheapest intervention, a reflective surface with a still air gap behind it, sits outside the measurement framework that decides what you are allowed to know works. That gap between your roof deck and your living space is not empty. It is the exact space where the extraction begins and where it can end. Here's what you do this weekend, not next month, not after you research it for 6 hours online and talk yourself out of it. This weekend. You walk to your kitchen. You find the bubble wrap you saved from whatever package arrived last Tuesday. You grab a spray bottle, fill it with tap water, and you go to the hottest window in your house. You already know which one it is. South-facing, single pane. The glass so hot by 2 in the afternoon, you could fry breakfast on the sill. That window has an R value of approximately 1. 1. The heat pouring through it is not gradual. It is direct, aggressive, and constant, and your air conditioner has been fighting it every single day you have lived in that house. You miss the glass. You press the bubble side of the wrap flat against it. It clings. No tape, no tools, no trip to the hardware store. Each bubble is a sealed air pocket, hundreds of them forming a barrier between your room and that superheated glass. Building science literature puts the heat reduction at up to 50% through a single pane window treated this way. Half the heat gone because you spent 45 seconds with packaging material you were about to throw away. It does not look elegant. Nobody is photographing it for a design magazine, but your room drops in temperature, your compressor cycles less, and the meter outside slows down. That is the only measurement that matters. Now scale it. A piece of rigid foam board from any hardware store, wrapped in aluminum foil, cut to fit your window frame, propped slightly away from the glass so it does not touch, reflects radiant solar energy before it crosses the threshold into your living space. The air gap between the foil and the glass is the mechanism. Without that gap, conduction wins. With it, reflection wins. Materials for one window cost under $2. You probably have scraps in your garage already. Then you go to the attic. You take standard heavy-duty aluminum foil, not a premium product, not a branded system. Foil. You staple it to the underside of your rafters, shiny side facing up toward the hot roof deck. You leave at least an inch of open air between that foil surface and the wood above it. That airspace is not decorative. It is the entire mechanism. Without it, the foil conducts heat downward. With it, the foil bounces radiant energy back toward the roof, and the trapped air acts as a buffer. Attic temperatures drop 20 degrees or more with a properly installed reflective layer. 20 degrees less heat radiating through your ceiling into the rooms where you sleep, where you work, where your thermostat is currently losing a war it was designed to lose. A staple gun. One afternoon. No monthly payment. The physics have not changed since NASA used this principle to keep human beings alive in the vacuum of space. The only thing that changed was who profits when you do not know about it. 3 years from now, your cooling bill will still arrive every month. That is not a prediction. That is a mechanical certainty baked into the physics of your building envelope. The only variable you control is whether that bill reflects the full thermal load hitting your roof, or whether 60% of that radiant energy already bounced back into the sky before it ever touched your ceiling joists. That difference, compounded across 36 months of summers is not a fortune. Nobody honest would call it life-changing wealth, but it is somewhere between $1,400 and $2,000 that stayed in your account instead of traveling through copper wiring into a utility company's quarterly earnings report. Money you never saw leave because it left in small enough increments that your brain filed it under normal. And here is your exit clause, stated plainly. If you staple foil to your rafters this weekend and your August bill does not drop, you lost one afternoon and $40 in materials. The foil stays, it does not rot. It does not require maintenance. It does not send you renewal notices. There is no subscription to cancel, no membership tier to downgrade, no advisor to fire. You either see the number fall on your next statement or you do not. The physics cannot lie to you the way a sales page can. Your thermostat will either cycle less or it will not. Your attic will either read 15 degrees cooler on a thermometer you already own or it will not. That is a falsifiable claim. With a built-in escape hatch, which is more than any financial product marketed to you this year has offered. The information that costs you the least to verify is always the information that someone else profits from you, never testing. A perforated radiant barrier, a still air gap, a weekend afternoon. That is your entire downside. Everything above that line is pure retained margin, compounding silently. Every month, the sun hits your roof and finds something in its path. Subscribe if you want the next layer of this.